but the year was 1999. I almost stopped being a Seventh-day Adventist, like overnight. It was this close. Okay. This coming from somebody who is a PK, the PKs who are here. My father is what I consider a bona fide Seventh-day Adventist minister and educator. So he is not only trained to be an Adventist minister. By the time I was born, he was already in that business. If you follow where I'm going. So I don't claim to have been born Seventh-day because there's nothing like being born Seventh-day Adventist. Adventism is something that catches you on the streets, hits you flat in the face with the an awakeness tool of saying, "Hey, wake up! Christ is coming." Okay. And I got that session twice. First of all, in my father's house. With my father, he was gentle. He didn't make it come like a, you know what I'm saying? And I think, as far as that is concerned, it grabbed my intellect. I could understand what Adventism is. I mean, to a point where I decided, no, it's okay, I can be baptized. But it was only intellectual. Then I'm artistic inclined, not just with music, piano and stuff like that, but I also draw. I do fine drawing. So during some of my coursework at Solusi, I was taken through a class called Christ in Music and Art. I don't remember, RELB 2 something. Yeah, Christ in Music and Art. In other words, somebody put together a college or a tertiary class content of how different artists have presented Christ to the world using their skill in art. Okay, not just the drawing part. Remember, I draw. Then they also went into music, and I'm a musician. I must admit, the music made me sleep. So I slept through most of the music part. I'm thinking, this is sounding nice. But the art kept me awake to a point where I realized I've not been converted. And I'm sitting in a college class. Are we together? Okay. By the time we went through the crucifixion and stuff, my heart broke. And for the first time in my life, the year was 1992. I was baptized in 1986. So there's a 6-year gap between my being baptized and my conversion, with the fact that my conversion was later. It's odd, man. Okay. But now, having gone through those kinds of experiences altogether, you understand why I'm telling you this kind of history. Okay. Come 1999, for the first time, somebody presented arguments about how invalid Ellen White is. Okay. Did you hear what I just said? How invalid Ellen White is. And the people would say things like, I've been an Adventist minister for like 40 years, and at that time, I had not even lived up to 40. And I'm thinking, this person has been an Adventist longer than I've been alive. And they've just given me reasons why Ellen White is irrelevant, is invalid. And I can't answer the arguments. Okay, I am the type of chap who likes being honest. Like persistently, I want to be honest. So at the end of the day, I had to honestly say, if I cannot answer this question on the issue of Ellen White, then there is no reason to be accepted that Adventist. I think you're following my line of reasoning. And for the first time in my life, I looked at the coming Sabbath and I realized I don't see any reason why I should go to church. Okay. Yeah. My whole life just collapsed overnight. Yeah. And what came to my rescue, I must confess, because come Sabbath I went to church, was this book, the Bible. Okay. How did that happen? I realized that as this person is making a presentation, this person had been an Adventist minister. They stopped being Adventist. I don't know what they eventually became, but now they campaign to inform Adventists about the deception through prophecy, which is why I'm telling you this. Okay. To say, Adventists, wake up, you have been deceived via prophecy. I follow me. But now, as this person is discrediting Ellen White, they were quoting the Bible like nobody's business. So I thought to myself, you know what? Let me take Ellen White and park Ellen White. Okay, that week, before the Sabbath. Pick up my Bible, take notes of this entire presentation I'm together. Take all the biblical verses. And then switch off the presentation. Go back through the entire presentation, but now I'm using my what? My Bible and I. Who is Brother Ennis? I could hear his voice very distinctly. And that song sends me back to like the 1970s. The first time I heard the song, My Bible and I, 1978. My Bible and I. I'm together. So it was just my Bible and I. Okay. And as I began going through the presentation point by point, other texts that have come, across started popping up, which he didn't refer to. And as I kept listing those texts, I began to see a clash between the format of the presentation and these other verses that I know. And I had to make a decision. Either this person is deceiving me using the Bible, or my Bible is faithful. And I decided, no, let me stick with my Bible. By the time I was done with that first presentation, I was happy with my Bible. I took that presentation and threw it in the trash. But now I was forced to admit I don't know what to do with Ellen White. You know what I'm saying? Okay. And I thought, well, I think I can go to church. Let me investigate this while still going to where? To church. Are we together? And so, with that brief background in mind, I'd wanted to also add that certain element, which is a bit personal on my side, but I'm not going to make the presentation so personal that Christ becomes irrelevant. But to show how Christ is in the business of making himself known. And we call that the gift of prophecy. We call that the gift of prophecy. So with that in mind, let us get started. Let me see how I sound without. Am I still audible? Can you still hear me? Yes. Looks like I can escape. Yeah. So I'm going to begin by taking us through something that I learned, and this is the advantage of some formal education. It's not always an advantage, but at least when you go through class, there are certain basics that you learn out together, which help you with the word prophecy. Okay. You also have the word prophesy. Words like prophet. Now, if this was an English language class, what do we call that? I took some people by surprise. You came here just to open up the Bible. Let's just go through a bit of grammar. You know, in language, some words are like a combination of other words. All right. So, in this case, if you notice, the word pro is common across these three words. Prophecy, prophesy, prophet. Okay. Or if you want, prophetess. Okay. So now, if the word pro is common to all of them, what do we call the word pro? Some of you know, it's just that you've forgotten. It's I think I heard the word. Somebody said it. It's a prefix. Are we together? It is a prefix. Are we together? Prefix simply means a word that you insert before another one. The word pre meaning before. Fixture. So I fix this word before the other one. Basically meaning to say the core word we're dealing with here is this one. Fesi, fet. How would you get it? Now, the word prophecy in itself comes from basically your Latin, but your Latin is also predated by your Greek, and the Greek is predated by Sanskrit. Sanskrit is like your old Indian languages. Now, if you go back, if you're studying languages, to the very ancient languages, how would you get it? Okay.
What did you say that is?
Let me list those there. So.
No, the word that you just used.
Sanskrit.
Sanskrit.
Yes.
Is it a language?
Yebo, a very ancient language. Just like, for example, Hebrew is a very ancient language. So it's rated as some of those ancient languages. As you know, languages are always evolving. Okay. In as much as, for example, my home language is a Nguni language. So siyakhuluma. Are we together? But ukuluma, if you go back into history, after a number of centuries, it disappears into more ancient languages. All the way back to the Tower of Babel. Okay. Are we together? Are you going to have some water for me? Because I think I'm okay. Oh, thank you.
Now you're going to take all my food. Let me do something.
I'm already beginning to fail.
I was drinking from that water fountain.
No, by the way, flu is not contagious. In case you didn't know.
That's different. That's not good.
That's what I discovered. Flu is not contagious.
Okay.
Yes, but that's a lesson for another time. For those who are curious, check the 1918 Spanish flu incident. There were some experiments done there to prove that flu is contagious. Like now, you notice I just coughed. They'll scrape my throat, smear it into somebody healthy. Nothing happened to them until they gave up. Are we together? Unfortunately, we're not taught that kind of history. So we've been made to believe that flu is contagious. But that's a lesson for another time. So the Sanskrit language, apparently the root word, will I remember it? Where is my cell phone? I've been putting notes on my cell phone. Did I capture this one? No, I only captured the Greek. Okay. No, let me pick it up from the Greek. In the Greek language, you've got the word force. You also have the word femi in the Greek language. Force, from those who have done science, the mineral phosphorus is named this way, particularly based on that root word. It's an element that burns if you light it up with a very bright flame. You remember, those of you who've done your science. If you burn phosphorus, it burns brightly. Okay, so the word force simply means light, a bright, illuminating light. Femi is your Greek word for speak. Like, for example, if I were using Greek, I am feming as we speak. To speak. And if you notice, as I speak, I am enlightening you about what's happening in my mind. Do you notice the common issue is light? So, force means the one who is for, because the word pro means the one who is for. Unlike the word con, which means the one who is against. For light, for speech, for what has been spoken. Does that make sense? Prophecy means pro-light, pro-speech, pro-enlightenment, for enlightenment. Are we together? Okay. And some of you, if you are a powerful Bible student, you should immediately start having a few biblical verses coming to mind. Like, for example, which is where my notes begin. It took me back to the beginning, this kind of thing, to suddenly realize, oh, this is why from the onset, as God planned in his mind, let me create a new world. Are we together? The very first phenomenon that he put on this area was what? Force, light. Let there be what? Light. And he himself says, I am the what? The light of the world. Are we together? So basically, anything to do with prophecy means you have a situation where there's darkness, and as soon as you introduce light, you are prophesying. So right from Genesis chapter 1, you start seeing the building blocks of what was later going to become prophecy. Does that make sense? Okay. I see people noting. Hopefully, by the time I'm done, questions that are popping up will be answered by the testimony of the things we're presenting. All right. If this is making sense, this is the reason why I began to start at this point. Because in my case, I also hadn't known this until some lecturer also decided, for some of the religious classes we had to take, to say, you know what? This is the background to this word. I actually did the same research for myself yesterday. Went into my dictionary, checked, and I confirmed. Are we together? Also decided, let me go to the etymological dictionary, the dictionary about the history of words. I got the same information. And some of the dictionary entries even went so far to say, in the New Testament, in other words, the only New Testament we know is in our Bibles. And by the way, the person who's writing the dictionary is not a Christian, from my understanding. But they had to acknowledge that when you are dealing with the word prophecy, you must acknowledge the contribution of what? The word of God. Okay. So you can imagine how much I've appreciated the light that God gave. I am still within the SDA Church in 2022, from 1999, when an accident almost happened that cost me my Christianity. You see, I think I was just going to get rid of everything, not just Adventism, including my Christianity.
I'm sorry, I'm smiling because I'm just thinking.
Yes.
I'm thinking of so many people who uses this word so lightly.
Yes.
They just throw. You have prophets here and there, and they speak a prophecy.
Yes.
Do they actually know what they're saying?
They probably do not. That's what I also concluded, now that you're raising that point, that if we do not know what a word means, it's so easy and so flippant to misuse it. Are we together? It's, But now that we've gone that deep, right from the beginning, let's start checking the few notes that I picked up from my Bible. And I hope the stuff that fascinated me will also fascinate you, because God's word is always like that. Are we together? Okay. So the root, as I said, has to do with the issue of light. So by definition, a prophet is a divine spokesperson. All right, by definition. But in general terms, a prophet is just a spokesperson. So in other words, when we hear over the news that the presidential spokesperson said, they could very much as well have also, within government, they know better than to use this word lightly. We don't call the presidential spokespeople prophets. That would be sacrilegious. We call them spokespeople, even though technically the definition is the same. Technically, but this one is reserved for the one who speaks for God. Okay. Implying, by definition again, a prophet, if God has said nothing, has nothing to say. Okay, some of you didn't get that. If God has not said anything, a prophet has nothing to say. Are we together? And by the same token, if God says something and the prophet is silent, that's a crime. Okay. That's a crime. There are sometimes when I hate this fascination with honesty, but when I have to dig into things of God, I appreciate that characteristic in me, because I sometimes dwell on definitions to a point where it would make somebody bored. And for me, I'm thinking, I'm enjoying this. Because I'm pulling stuff out from areas where I didn't think there was anything. Okay. Right, now let's go and deal with the content of divine utterance. And I picked that there's basically two pieces of content that God can speak at any point in time. And the reason that this entire book is prophecy. Right. Implying to call the writings of Ellen White the spirit of prophecy is also a misrepresentation. Why? Because it began here, the spirit of prophecy begins here and then extends into the writings of Ellen White. Did I lose some people? Spokesperson of God. All right. I wanted us to note a few Bible writers. You had Moses, for example, right? The prominent ones. You've got Paul, another one. Who's the other one that we can remember off the top of our heads? David, with the Psalms. John. Okay, let me stop right there. Were these people prophets? And what's the answer to the question? Yes. Yes, they were. Are we together? So, in other words, whatever they prophesied is part of the spirit of prophecy. I'm still going to get to the issue about spirit of prophecy. All right. So, by the time you add the testimonies of Mrs. White, are we together? She is just an additional witness to these prior ones. Are we together? In other words, calling only her writings the spirit of prophecy is not entirely true. It should be everything, inclusive of what? The testimonies. Because all of these individuals were using the gift of what? Of prophecy to relay messages from God to humanity. Are we together? I know I'm being a bit technically accurate. It can put some people off. But I'm doing this for a specific purpose. And I think you picked my purpose from the beginning. When we do not know what prophecy is, we are bound to misrepresent it. Okay. All right? We are bound to misrepresent it. All right? I see there is a question here. This is the letter E. Testimonies. Okay. In my case, in fact, in order to be always technically correct, I more often than not say, when I'm referring to the writings of Ellen White, the testimonies of Ellen White, because I'm aware the entire Bible is the spirit of prophecy as well. Are we together? And in that sense, whenever I'm in discussion with people, when people say the spirit of prophecy, then I will immediately know, oh, they are referring to the testimonies. I don't argue with them. Remember, this is not to do with arguments, but to do with being true to the original definition of what prophecy is. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So if we conclude the
Oh, so maybe let me use a different color.
yes, it's better blue and black. It's good.
Okay. Could I please rewrite this?
Okay.
For those of you who are taking notes. Blue and black. This one has been disqualified. Red carded. I was writing Moses. And then I wrote Paul. Then there was David.
And John.
And then there was John as well. And all of these are prophetic writings that you find where in the Bible. Are we together? Then outside the Bible, we refer to Mrs. White, whom we know. Are we together? And the testimonies that she wrote. Okay. And the testimonies that she wrote. Okay. And I'm simply saying, what inspired Moses is what also inspired Ellen White. The only distinction is we know that the biblical record is complete. So we are not going to add, even by accident, to the biblical record. It's complete. So she testifies to the truth of what is here, which is why these are her testimonies. Okay. So calling them the spirit of prophecy is correct, but calling them exclusively so is what is incorrect. Okay. It's inclusive. It's all inclusive. Makes sense, right? Right. Yeah, you're happy now. Okay. Then let's continue. I need to check. Now I was going to the issue of the content. And having mentioned that, some of it is, and by the way, I got the technical term from the theologians at Solusi. They talk about forth telling. All right? Which is that other 95% I was talking about. And this one is what they call foretelling. Where you predict, pre means for, dict, tell. If you notice, that's the same word, expressed differently in the English language. Okay. This one is forth-tell. In other words, God is speaking out his mind about what he thinks about what I'm doing now. Okay. So he brings forth from his being, this is what I wanted to know. Okay. Are we together? And by the way, from 2 Timothy, let's read this text, 3 verse 16. The Apostle Paul says to this young person, this is what the purpose of prophecy is. And he gives it to the young men in that familiar biblical text. Okay. Could we quickly look that one up and read it?
All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness.
Do you notice that list? For doctrine, in other words, to know, just for us to know what God's purpose is for humanity within the work of truth. Next one, after doctrine? Reproof. Okay? And most of the times, brethren in church are happy with knowing doctrine. But as soon as we need to reprove each other, don't judge. But if you notice, it's the same word of prophecy that's telling us, once in a while, if I'm out of order, and you reprove me, not based on your own opinion, but based on what? The word of prophecy. I must accept the what? The reproof. Amend my ways and line up. Next one.
Correction.
Correction is related to reproof. I think reproof has got more to do with somebody coming to confront you. Correction is where I see myself. You know what? I don't think I'm walking straight. How do I know that? I've just learned from the testimonies that this habit that I have is not actually okay. Then I what? I straighten up and I correct the wrong. Next one.
Instruction.
Instruction informing away ignorance. Okay.
In righteousness.
In righteousness, if you notice, it's also specific with the context. Anything outside of righteousness is subject to personal opinion. Okay, I can choose to disagree. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Should we use the metric system or the US system? No, I think the US system is better. Who cares? Does that have anything to do with righteousness? No, it's just got to do with our own means of making measurements. Okay. If you follow where I'm going with that line of reasoning. And sometimes you'll find some brethren no longer attend the same church because the other brother is so dumb, he thinks the US system is better than metric. And people part ways. Yeah. But it's okay. 2 Corinthians, no. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 14 is another interesting text. 1 Corinthians 12, verse 14. And this one is in tandem with the whole of chapter 14. How does that text read? Yes.
First Corinthians 12:14.
Yes, ma'am.
For in fact, the body is not one member, but many.
Yes. The body is not. But.
In fact, the body is not one member,
But.
many.
Exactly. In other words, many members. Okay. And why is the Apostle Paul saying that? Because we all have different gifts given by the what? The Spirit. For different reasons. Are we together? But now I wanted to highlight a particular gift. Maybe you can actually assist me. I didn't highlight this verse. The one that talks about the when it lists the gifts, the interesting thing is when you go through that list in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, the first one that's always first on the list is the gift of prophecy. The one that's always last is the gift of tongues. Each time the Apostle Paul. Okay, could you pick out where those verses are? Prior to verse 14, I think. And I think towards the end of chapter 12.
Verse 20, yeah. Having all the gifts of healing,
Yes.
do all speak with tongues, do all interpret, but covet earnestly the best gifts,
Yes.
and yet show I unto you a more excellent way.
Yes. That's you're going right down to the end of chapter 12.
I think so.
Oh yeah. And God had set some in the church, first apostles, secondly prophets,
Yes.
thirdly teachers,
Yes.
after that miracles,
Yes.
then gifts of healing, helps, governments,
Yes.
diversities of tongues.
Yes. That's the one that I was looking for. Are you together? And then when he says, I'm now going to show you a more excellent way, he starts launching into a powerful, explanation on love. How the expression of these gifts in the absence of love, outside of righteousness, is like what? A sounding gong. It's like making noise. Okay? Are we together? All right. Now, in chapter 14, he decides to dwell on this minor gift, but once again, he is very particular to make a contrast between it and the gift of prophecy. I wanted to call your attention to verse 22 in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 22. Right.
Wherefore tongues are for a sign,
Yes.
not to them that believe,
Yes.
but to them that believe not.
Yes.
But prophesying serveth not for them
Yes.
that believe not,
Yes.
but for them which believe.
Exactly. Did you get that? Okay. The significance of the things God has to say through his people is a sign for those who already believe in God. In other words, I've got a cell phone here, and for all of those of you who are connected with me very personally, you don't not only have my number, but you've saved it in your phone book under my name. At any point in time when I get a call as well from you, I will not only register that there's a call coming from you, but it will also identify your call by name. Okay. Are we together? Now, it so happened that before you called this morning, yesterday, I got a call from some people who are marketing stuff that I don't need. Do you know what I did with that number? I blocked it. Okay. In other words, prophecy is a communication tool. God is in the heavens. He wants to say something to his people. And as long as his people want to hear from God, they do not want to hear people speaking multiple languages. They want to hear, what does God have to say? If I'm African speaking, whatever God is going to say in Afrikaans, I'm going to absorb that. Okay. If I'm Xhosa speaking, anything God says in Xhosa, I'm going to absorb that. Are we together? If I'm English speaking, likewise. Are we together? Okay. Fortunately, some of us have got a bit of the gift of tongues. You say something in English, I'll get you. You say it in Xhosa, I'll get you. In Zulu, I'll get you. You go to Sesotho, I'll get a bit. Whatever I miss, I'm going to ask the PK. I'm still going to get it. Are we together? Hence the gift of tongues. But at the end of the day, for people who already believe in God, are we together? A sign that God is still working mightily is seen in the gift of prophecy. I'm actually going down to clarify that one of the definitions of the word prophecy simply means the ability to take God's word and present it to the people. Like, for example, what happened at Divine Service was prophesying. Okay. What happens during summer school when someone is able to stand, put together some stuff using the gift of prophecy and explain it to the brethren? That person is prophesying. Are we together? 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Let's backtrack to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And by the way, this might open up another line of study for people who are interested. Okay. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 gives quite a number of traditional Adventists in the African sense a lot of headache. Okay. You will understand why when we start reading from verse 3 to verse 5. First Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3 to 5.
But I would have you know
Yes.
that the head of every man is Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and the head of the woman is the man,
Mm-hmm.
and the head of Christ is God.
Mm-hmm.
Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoreth his head.
Mm-hmm.
But every woman that prayeth or prophesieth with her head uncovered,
Mm-hmm.
dishonoreth her head, for that is even all one, as if she were shaven.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to discuss the issue of the ladies, blah, 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 but I'm concentrating on when a lady prays or prophesies. The word prophesy there actually means preach, to share the word of God. So for those who have ever wondered, should a woman preach? It's like one of those dumb questions. Should somebody with a voice say something? Of course. Okay. But now we are being given a clarification on what terms and how. Are we together? Okay. And it says there, no, she should have a sign of authority on her head for her to be able to do that within a sacred assembly. I just want to clarify that the word prophesy does not always mean someone who's got the ability to predict the future. No. It also simply means to preach. Are we together? Okay. Now let's give the last bit of context before I give some interesting details that I picked from trying to apply all of this stuff to the gift of prophecy as we have it within our understanding in the Adventist Church. Remember, I took us briefly to the beginning, but before I go to the beginning, here's a text to share on foretelling. In Isaiah chapter 48, verse 3. Isaiah 48, verse 3.
I have declared the former things from the beginning,
Yes.
and they went forth out of my mouth,
Yes.
and I shewed them, and I shewed them, I did them suddenly,
Yes.
and they came to pass.
Do you notice that the Lord is saying, I am free to go into the future and into the past freely because I'm God. Okay. So the issue of foretelling is part of prophesying. But if you notice, that is the part that distinguishes prophecy that comes from God. Because every once in a while, he throws in elements there that he knows even the devil cannot predict this one. He can't see this. Yeah. Because remember, the devil is smart. He can more or less guess what's going to happen. Like, for example, there's this illustration that I picked up from Pastor Doug Bachelor. He uses an illustration of somebody seated in a helicopter with a friend, flying over a highway. Can you picture that? You're up in a helicopter. You're flying over a highway. And the highway is going to go through a tunnel. And you know where the tunnel starts. It goes down to one lane and there's a stop and go control. Are you hearing? You can picture that, so you're going and you're chatting. Then you see two cars approaching the tunnel from opposite sides. And in your mind, you know one of those cars has to stop in order for the other car to go through. But suddenly you realize both of them are going full speed into the tunnel at the same time. Guess what you're all going to say? There's going to be a crash. Okay, you are foretelling what's going to happen because you can actually foresee it. Do you follow where I'm going? Okay. Now the devil does that. He's able to foresee certain things, some of them because he has planned them, and when he can see now the Lord is not preventing them. You know, they can more or less foretell, like the way the government is able to tell when COVID is going on. COVID is going to come. Somehow they're able to tell, you know, so that they can have their meetings when COVID is low. And when their meetings are done, suddenly COVID goes somewhere. That's the kind of foretelling. But now, the government cannot tell us whether they'll be in power 600 years from now. They cannot tell us that. Even Lucifer cannot predict that. But the Lord can easily foretell that. Like, for example, we might be saying, there's going to be what? A crash. And yet the Lord knows, no, one of those guys is going to put on his brakes and he'll say, nah, yeah, you're wrong. You say, but Lord, didn't you see? He says, nah. The other guy put on his brakes and the other one saw it because he put his lights on and therefore there was no crash. And we come down in the helicopter, people in the tunnel, and there's no crash. Lord, how did you know? Isaiah 48, verse 3. I am able to tell the beginning from the end. God is not confined to time. So we do admit there is some kind of what foretelling that's involved. But it's not just any foretelling. It's the incredible kind, the kind that is unbelievable. Right. And that's where Daniel and Revelation come into play. How did God know 2,000 years before now that this is going to happen today? How is that possible? And he says, nah, it's because I'm God. If I gave you the specifics, you would faint. So just accept it because I'm who? I'm God. Let's go to the beginning. I just wanted to give a brief understanding why prophecy is necessary. Okay. The reasoning here is so elementary, even you guys are going to be surprised. Okay. Like we said, in the beginning, God said, let there be what? Light. Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. And there was light. And God saw that the light was what? Was good. Then in John chapter 1, verse 4, what do we read? John chapter 1, verse 4. Verse 4.
In him was life, and the life was the light of men.
John 1, verse 4. Do you notice the allusion of the life in men being the light of him? And who is him? In him. You have to go to verse 1, John chapter 1, verse 1, to understand who him is. Who is he? Reading from John chapter 1, verse 1. Who is he? It's the word. And John chapter 1, verse 14 clearly tells us who this word is, because it says that same word became flesh. So who are we talking about here? Jesus Christ. So basically my understanding is, I think when we get to Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, God was saying, ta-da, I'm here. Because he's the light. You know what I'm saying? When you've been playing hide and seek with the children, and you've hidden so long, they are getting a bit frustrated with this hide and seek. Hey, where's Daddy? So finally you have to reveal yourself, ta-da, there's Daddy. Are you together? Let there be what? Let there be light, and there he is. Are you together? Okay. And there God was. Let there be light. But now, interestingly, this light is come down again to the same planet. Are you together? As the life of men, because death has invaded the what? The planet. You are going to see this drama playing itself out repeatedly. Okay. But let me stop right there for now. Is what I'm doing making sense? Okay. And if you notice, this is with the background of prophecy. Okay. Because if you go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, what does Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 say? No, not John, but Genesis. Yes.
And the earth was without form.
Yes. Yes.
And void, and
Yes.
darkness was upon the face.
And darkness was upon the face of the what? Which makes sense why the first thing that actually comes into the picture is what pulls the darkness away. Okay. In other words, you've got a context of darkness, and suddenly prophecy, the light peels the darkness away. Right. So the act of creation actually reenacts the process of prophesying. For some of us who actually never thought about it. In my case, fortunately, because of the privilege while I'm yet alive to be asked to share some of these Bible studies, when I have to dig, I'm finding that it's benefiting me for much more than the rest of you. So, and I'm not embarrassed to say that I'm actually benefiting immensely from these kinds of exercises. But I'm also hoping you are just as blessed by the time I'm done as I've been with putting this together. Here's another example. On day 4 in verse 14, what do we find there? Genesis chapter 1, verse 14.
And God said, let there be light in the firmament of the heavens.
Yes.
Divide the day from the night.
Yes.
And let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years.
Exactly. Right. So after having created light, God also creates the lights. There's a major one to shine during the day, the one that we call the day star, the sun. Okay. Then there are the minor ones that will shine in the night, the moon and the stars. Okay. The lights. But also in tandem with let there be light in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. And then in Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 and 16, What does Jesus say?
You are the light of the world.
So this is the light of the world telling us that we are the light. Okay, could somebody read those verses? For us, Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 and 16.
Ye are the light of the world.
Yes,
A city that is set on
yes,
and a hill cannot be hid.
yes.
Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So if you notice, what happens with God being the light is not stopping us from reflecting God's character. Okay. And hence the issue that God has something to say to a dark world, but He is not going to say it personally. He's going to use prophecy. Are we together? And the question is, as God said to Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 6, whom shall I send and who will go for us? You remember that text? And what does our hymn say? Here am I, O Lord, send me. So that hymn that we sing is a prophecy hymn. It's part of Prophecy 101. When I say, Lord, here I am, send me. Because I'm understanding that I am now being introduced to the light, who is Jesus Christ. He says, I am the light. But the same light is saying, I am creating lights. The one to rule the night, the other to rule the day. Do you follow where the picture is going? Which kind of like deepens the understanding about prophecy. So those of you who are diligent Bible studies, you can actually pick some of these things and run even deeper with them. Okay. Before I finish with the beginning, in the sixth day of creation, something remarkable happens again. In verses 26 and 27 of Genesis 1, verses 26 and 27. And I'm gonna partner this one with Luke chapter 3, verse 38. What happens in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26?
Then God said, let us make man in our image,
Okay.
according to our likeness.
Mm-hmm.
Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea,
Mm-hmm.
over the birds of the air,
Mm-hmm.
and over the cattle, over all the earth,
Mm-hmm.
and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.
Let's just pause there without reading verse 27. If you notice, the light is saying, let us, the light, make men lights in our own what? Images, photocopies of us. In which sense? The same way in which we have got dominion over our terrain, we are also going to give them dominion over this planet. Okay, so God has dominion over the entire universe as the light. Okay. Then He creates these lights called you and me to give us dominion over what? This planet. Okay. Does that make sense? If you notice, once again, that's a prophetic process. Okay. And by the way, when He says, in our image, the word image in the English language implies that you've got a mirror and you are seeing a reflection from a mirror. Are you together? Okay. All right. Like, for example, when some people meet me, they, usually for the first time, but they've met my dad, they can't help but come call me like privately. Aren't you the son of so and so? You know? And then I have to say, oh yes, and I'll be smiling. Because I suddenly recognize, oh, they can see the image of my dad in me. Are we together? Okay. Image. Once again, the idea about how light is used as a means of transferring the original. In fact, that's how a photocopier machine works. Have you noticed? Okay, you place the original on that glass panel, close it, okay, so that no other light interferes with the copy. When you press start, there's that humming sound that goes, and then you actually see the light following the original, and as it's doing that, it's making an image on another piece of paper, and lo and behold, the image comes out. And when you compare the two, yeah, that's photocopying is prophecy in a very technical sense. So God's choice of words right there in the beginning. And by the way, the reason why I'm going through this will become clear as I go towards the end of this presentation. Okay, so let me not belabor the point. So men had direct communication access to God in Eden. Prophecy at that point in time was a lived experience. It wasn't necessary for God to have another human being tell the other, God said, are you sure? They're asking, if I'm sure, what should I say? You know how it happens when you don't have direct access. Like, for example, sometimes what happens when a couple is quarreled in the house. Like, there's this bad example that I once read about. So I'm going to use it instead of using my own family as an example. You'll forgive me. Okay. The quarrel between the husband and wife was so bad, they were using the children to communicate. How bad was it? You are sitting at the table, dinner has been served. These two are not talking. Are you together? Okay. Then the mother will suddenly say out loud at the table, Junior, tell your mom there's some lettuce sticking out of her tooth. And the mom is sitting at the same table. Then Junior has to say, Mom. Then mom is, she's going to try and find the lettuce. Are we together after she's found it? Junior, tell your dad I found it. Okay, and she's also saying it out loud, same table. And basically that's how they were operating, to show that they are not talking to each other, they are not prophesying. I think you follow where I'm going. Okay. Now, this kind of prophecy became necessary because out of that light that brought God's presence onto this planet, the Prince of Darkness came. He started studying the situation. Okay. And he clicked that the best way to enter this planet is through this most beautiful creation. Okay, because she happened to have been created last. Okay. So she had to be the most beautiful. And number two, he could see that while the man worships God, when God has gone back to the heavens, he treats his wife like she's an object of worship. Are we together? Okay, and that's how it's supposed to be, you know? Okay, for those of you who are married. Okay. Does he still worship? Fortunately, he didn't hear me say that. But I think you are following where I'm going. And he decided, you know what? That's where I'm going to make my mark. If you notice, the two of them were separated, Adam and Eve. Lucifer could have decided to confront Adam in Eve's absence. He didn't go to Adam because he knew that one is a hard nut. So he went to the one that he realized, you know what? If I get her, he is going to fall because of her. Okay. For some parents, that also happens with us and our children, to the extent to which we love them. I remember a few weeks back when it occurred to me that we're approaching the time of Jacob's trouble. And one of the things we've been warned is going to happen is how they're going to grab my children. Are we together? Threaten me to say, if you do not start adhering to climate change lockdown, we're going to kill your son in front of you. Okay. Some of you have got sons like him. He's got a son who's the age of my son. And I think, Pawaj, I mean, you think he's the cutest thing on earth. He's not as cute as my son is. So you can imagine when they threaten to kill my son, how that's going to make me feel. And remember, this person who's threatening to kill your son has you under arrest. You are handcuffed. In other words, even if I wanted to make them feel my rage, I can't do anything because I've been handcuffed. Okay. Probably twice, both on the hands and the feet. And if I say I'm not going to do anything, and they say, no, we're going to kill him slowly. Okay. And that's how they used to get some people to actually what? To recant from their beliefs. By targeting those whom they love. Are we together? And that's how Satan got darkness back onto this planet. Created, pulled out of darkness from the beginning, and Satan resets the planet back into darkness. Are we together? Okay. And then you find that story incident in Genesis chapter 3, I think from verse 6. Yeah, let's read it. I don't want to summarize it. I hope you're not forgetting the word prophecy, because I'm still sitting on it. Now, it's actually verse 8, the most direct. Genesis chapter 3, verse 8.
And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day.
Yes.
And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees.
Exactly. So imagine, here is the light walking in the garden, approaching the lights that have not only, they haven't even dimmed, they've gone off. Okay. And what do the lights do? They go into hiding, because remember, if the house has been dark, stage 4, load shedding, are we together? And suddenly the lights come on and you are sleeping. What's the first thing that you do? You hide. Have you noticed?
Yes.
Why is it? It's because the presence of light is painful to the eyes. And for the first time on this planet that used to be bathed with light, light was unwelcome. Are we together? And this is what made the ministry of prophecy necessary, because ever since that day, people prefer it when it's dark. If you notice, when we are supposed to be sleeping, this planet is actually jiving. Have you noticed that? There's more life at night on planet Earth than there is during the day. Okay. Those of you who didn't know that, please don't check it, because you might end up joining the in my case, I happened to notice because nobody told me that I should stop reading when it's bedtime. So I would read and read. Next thing, the whole house is quiet. Why? What's happening? Then I check. I've been reading and I didn't notice the time. Okay. Then I notice, oh, everybody's going to sleep. And I'm still up because I'm what? I'm reading. I'm together. Then when you look out the window, you suddenly realize, no, it's time for you to be sleeping. In other words, it's over time for you to be sleeping, but there's a hive of activity outside. Okay. All right. This world is interesting. Okay. But now I'm just trying to highlight how we are back to a world that's been governed by this prince of darkness. And God is still in the business of bringing light back to light up this planet. Hence, the need of the gift of prophecy. It couldn't get more 101 than that. Okay. Suddenly there's a gulf between God and people. All right. And God actually promised, Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, a favorite text of mine. I think I've said this before in this church, together with John chapter 1, verse 14. Genesis 3, verse 15 will suffice. Okay.
Genesis 3, 15.
Yes.
And I will put enmity between you and the woman,
Yes.
and between your seed and her seed.
Yes.
He shall bruise your head,
Yes.
and you shall bruise his head.
Exactly. See, that seed that we are talking about. Okay. When God said, let us make man in our image, the one who said, let us make man in our image is the seed. Alright. The seed says to the Father, let's make man in our image, after our likeness. And now that man has fallen into sin, the seed comes walking as the light of the world in the garden. Alright. And the lights run away. And he tells us, hey, who told you you were naked? Okay. Hey, oh, and for the record, this text is not there in my notes, but it suddenly come to mind. According to Psalm 104, verse 2, we understand that God's garment of covering is light, in fact. Psalm 104, verse 2. Let me be listing this text as we go. Psalm 104, verse 2.
Who covereth thyself with light everyday garments? Who stretches out the heavens like a curtain?
Exactly. I'm trying to explain what happened when the man and his wife discovered that they were naked. In other words, when Genesis chapter 2, verse 25 states that the man and his wife were naked and were not ashamed, it's referring to nakedness in the context of physical clothes. They didn't fashion clothes for themselves or go to Truworths or Woolworths. You know what I'm saying? Buying clothes to cover their nakedness. They didn't have clothes such as these. But they had light covering their bodies because they were created in the image of who? Of he whose garment of covering is light. According to Psalm 104, verse 2. But now, as soon as Adam fell into sin, that light covering disappeared. They saw, literally, what's happened to the light? It's gone. How will we be able to stand in the presence of who? The light minus the covering of light, which is why they hid and tried to fashion those aprons, remember? Okay. Using fig leaves. Yes, using fig leaves. Okay. You remember that? All right. Okay. If you notice, there's a lot of light we're discussing here and the absence thereof. And basically, that's what to do with prophecy, because the key word in prophecy is the word force, standing for light. And why do we need the light? In order to peel the darkness away, inform ignorance away, inform misinformation away, or rather disinformation. Okay. I also noted Isaiah 59 verse 2. Okay. Which clearly states why there's a gulf between people and God. Okay.
Isaiah 59,
Verse 2.
But your iniquities have separated you from God, from your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you, so that he will not hear.
Did you hear that? Your sins have what?
Separated.
So the reason why we have the spirit of prophecy and the gift of prophecy, and the activities of prophesying is because of the presence of sin. By the way, sin is now represented by darkness. Okay. In order to get rid of sin, you need to shine a light into the what? Okay. I'm suddenly remembering another text that wasn't there in my notes. That God commanded the light to shine. Is Jeremiah? Is it the prophet Jeremiah? Who is an idea which verse I'm referring to? For God has commanded the light to shine.
25 verse 16 says, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven."
I see that text, but now there's a text that also says.
Not 2 Peter chapter 1.
Is this the one you're referring to? 2 Peter.
What does the text say?
The one, excuse me, the one that I'm looking for. For God hath commanded the light to shine. Let me see if I can do a quick search.
And shine in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ.
Thank you. Second Corinthians
4 verse 6.
4 verse 6. Thank you. So once again, darkness, sin, righteousness, light, and when righteousness confronts sin and sin is driven away, excuse me, by the presence of the light, this is through an activity called prophecy, done by prophets as they prophesy using the word of God, the spirit of prophecy. All right. Now, here is the part that amazed me the most. I'm going back to my notes. Of my presentation. Going back to the beginning. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. I'm now looking at the process of man's creation. Excuse me. When we... Yes, sir.
Okay, I don't mean to sidetrack a bit,
Yes,
my brother,
yes.
but I just, as I've been sitting, a thought is coming into my mind.
Into your mind.
That are there prophets in God's church today?
Okay. We are actually going to be discussing that as soon as I'm done.
Okay.
This is my last point.
All right.
Yeah. This is my last point.
Okay.
In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, God gives us the process of creating man. I wanted us to see something that happens there, which actually repeats the same point that I keep emphasizing. Darkness, light comes, darkness goes away. Prophecy. Right? What's the process involved?
Genesis 2 verse 7.
Yes.
And the Lord God formed
Yes.
man of the dust of the ground.
Let's pause right there, then you're going to continue. So notice, first of all, you've got the Lord. His intention is to eventually have man. But before he gets to man, he employs the dust of the ground. Let's continue.
And breathed into his nostrils the breath of life.
Pause right there. Now, I wanted us to note from God's perspective, God had to expire breath of life into this dust. Then the dust inspires the breath in order. Let's conclude the verse.
And man became a living being.
Living soul. I prefer this word.
Soul.
Yes. Are we together? All right. I'm not going to use the word expire in its biological sense. When I go like this, I've just expired air out of my lungs. Are we together? Inspired air into my lungs. Expire, inspire. Are we together? From the words, remember the prefixes. Ex means out, from the word exit. In means exact opposite. Come in, exit. In, exit. So as God is breathing the breath of life here to expire, here is dust of the ground which is lifeless. It inspires the breath of life and then comes alive. That's another act of prophecy. Okay. 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 21. Second Peter. It was thrilling to actually see what, okay, the manner in which we have been created is also a summary of what God does. Okay. During the process of
For the prophecy came not in old time by
Yes.
the will of men,
yes.
but holy men of God
Mm-hmm.
spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost.
Exactly. Came not by the will of who? Of men, which is why you always have to have the Lord God as the originator of a specific light. Okay. Then to convey it, he must convey it to somebody who is actually dead without any inspiration from God. Remember what we said when we began? If God has said nothing, a prophet has nothing to say. Prophetically. Okay. But are you following me?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the other text to the old scripture?
Is God real?
Yes. Do you notice the God breathed is inspired? Okay. Where do we get that text? 2 Timothy 3 verse 16. Okay. The same process for producing these inspired texts was used in creating men. Okay. Except the interpretation of the word breath there is slightly different. For the one, the Spirit of God inspires a person whose mind is otherwise carnal with divine thoughts to convey to people and give them the words of life. Are we together? Okay. But with men, we don't say God breathed himself into men. He breathed his breath of life. And man became a what? A living soul. Okay. This is what makes the Bible different from all the other books that we can read, without exception. Okay. It also makes the references from the writings of Ellen White different from all the references of the PhDs within the Adventist Church, without exception. Okay. Why? There was some inspiration involved, some God breath was involved. There is no single PhD I've known who claims that when they walked up to receive their gown, you remember that ceremony after they woke, very seriously. Somehow they got the Spirit infused into them so that as they produce their doctoral dissertations and they write their books, those were products of the Spirit of God. Are we together? Unlike Ellen White, she never walked down a graduation aisle. Are we together? But that's God's business. He always pulls the what? The dust. Okay. So more often than not, if you're going to have a PhD telling you that I believe God has said we should do this, check if that PhD is dust first. If it's not dust, you just take it as his personal opinion. Is what I'm saying making sense? Because for me, that's what I've discovered. God never works with stuff that has got human credit. He never does that. Without exception. Okay. And now I want to illustrate how this keeps happening time and again in the Bible. Here's another quick example. Okay. After the flood, man decides, let me build a tower so that I can ascend through this darkness and reach the light of the gods. Do you remember the Tower of Babel? Do you notice how I've rephrased their objective? Some of you didn't notice. They said, let us build a what? A tower so that we can ascend through this darkness of human limitation and reach the what? The house of God. Okay. So in other words, they were trying to prophesy, but in reverse, to see if they can generate godlikeness from a human perspective. Are we together? That's what the Tower of Babel was all about. Guess what was God's response? The Bible says, God said, let us go down. In other words, he's actually trying to highlight, no matter how high they've gone, in order to get to them, I must still go down. Okay. To show that their effort was actually useless. And he went down and he's thinking, oh, shame. Hey, they've been so busy. They've been so busy. Yeah, they've been busy. Yeah, so what do? Why don't we make them busier? How are we going to do that? Let's confuse their languages. Their problem, they've got one common language. Okay? And we're first moving to a new world order. If you notice, we basically have one common language in a sense. If some of you haven't noticed, there's one common language in the world today. Again. And the Tower of Babel is going up. Again. In the context of prophecy. Are we together? So God confused their language. And he did that so thoroughly. They what? They got busier. They got separated. And they stopped that useless project that they were doing. Okay. But you notice that was an attempt to reach divinity from a human level. The reverse prophesying. In other words, for people who claim that they are prophets without having been called of God. Did you want to say something, sister? Okay. It's never going to be possible. All right? Okay. But now I want us to also note when God's timing was fine, okay, at Pentecost, he is the same God who reversed the damage that he did in order to make effective his prophecy. He gave people the gift of tongues. You remember? Okay. What happened in the Tower of Babel? Confused tongues. On the day of Pentecost, he resolved it. Same God. And his word has never spread as fast as it is spreading even up to today. You can imagine some fellow out there in dark Africa, where I call dark, I'm not sure why we're called the dark continent. Maybe it's because of our handsome complexion. Okay. So prophecy has even managed to reach so-called dark Africa. Okay. Despite the confusion of tongues. Okay. Here's another quick example. Right. Have you noticed that according to the line through which Jesus was supposed to be born, each one of the matriarchs was barren? One after the other. Okay. Until we got to the one who confused the mix, the third one. Abraham's wife was barren. It was like God dealing with dust. Okay. In other words, there was matrimonial activity in the matrimonial bedroom, producing absolutely nothing as far as children are concerned. Okay. And Abraham is wondering, how am I going to get a seed if we are not producing anything? Dust. Are you together? Then when God's time was right, God goes down to tell him, you know what? It's now time. And even he was beginning to doubt his fertility. And God is saying, now, you see now, when you are doubting your own fertility, now I can use you to produce a seed, to produce the Messiah down the line. Are you together? And guess what happened? Isaac was born out of dust. Expiration from God, breathed into the dust of Sarah's barren womb. Out comes a living soul called Isaac, a miracle child. On that note, in Genesis chapter 17, I'm now picking the notes off the top of my head. Before Isaac is born, are you together? God makes sure he renames Abraham through the rite of circumcision. And if you notice circumcision in the manner in which it is done, he was also predicting that the Messiah is not going to be produced from the product of sexual human activity. Slicing off the foreskin of a man. He's saying, I'm not going to be using a man to produce the Messiah. Have you thought about it? Notice most of us have not thought about it. Okay. Even though some of us have now started misapplying it to say circumcision is a sign of moving from boyhood to manhood. The original purpose of circumcision was to say, these people in this line of Abraham, this is where the Messiah is going to be born. And even though we are producing the people who will produce the virgin, who will produce the Messiah, the men in this line, this line, are not going to be responsible for the conception of the Messiah. How do we know that? All of them, their foreskin is chopped off. All of them. To show when we get to that last stage, you are not going to participate. And guess where sin entered? Through the woman. And where is the Messiah coming? From the woman. God working through what? Through dust. To confound darkness by bringing light. It can't get more 101 than this. Have I lost anybody? We're still together, right? Okay. My examples are running out. Don't worry about me. But I had quite a number in the E. With the messianic line, this one was quite interesting. Okay. For Isaac, when he got married to Rebecca, are we together? 20 years. All right. Same business. Are we together? Of being married, no product whatsoever. Until Isaac went to God to say, God, what's happening? And God is thinking, okay, since he's complained, it's been 20 years. All right, let me do something. God is the one who had to do something for Jacob and Esau to be born. Are you together? Come to Jacob. Remember, Esau we're not going to even look at. Okay. The woman that he fell in love with, again, by his choice, was also barren. Okay. Somehow, God is just doing this prophecy thing repeatedly as he's approaching the birth of who? The Messiah. And now, by the time Mary, who was born also from the same line of David through Abraham, are we together? When it was time for her to give birth to the Messiah, she also asked the all-important question, how is it possible that I'm going to conceive when I am not married and I have never slept with a man? And what was God's response? The Spirit, hence my saying, will later discuss the spirit of prophecy. He's going to what? Cover the same thing that happened when God created this planet. Remember Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. The Spirit hovered above the waters. Okay, so the Spirit had to come and hover above Mary in her state of barrenness, her state of darkness, and out of a situation where you are not supposed to get any conception, Christ was conceived. And he himself, the Prince of Love, the Prince of Peace, the seed, the Son of Man. You notice that he always called himself the Son of Man, even though he knew he's the Son of who? Of God. We call him the Son of God, but he calls himself the Son of who? The Son of Man. And have you also noticed in the genealogy of Christ, who is the Son of Man? Remember, he calls himself the Son of Man. If you go to Luke chapter 3, could we all just go to Luke chapter 3? Go to the last verse in Luke chapter 3. Tell me whose son Adam was. The last human being in the lineage of Christ. I'm actually getting strong now. Thanks for the prayer. What does the verse read? The very last verse.
Which was the son of Enos, which was the son of Seth.
Yes.
Which was the son of Adam.
Yes.
Which was the son of God.
So can you imagine? Adam is called the Son of God because he came directly off God's hands. Okay. But the same one who created Adam is calling himself the Son of what? The Son of Man. Okay. So I wanted to put it to you, brethren, based on what I've just said. Okay. You know what this symbol means, right? It's a mathematical symbol.
Infinity.
Infinity. Okay. There's infinity past and there's infinity future. Somewhere throughout the course of the progress of infinity are we together? God decided, you know what? Let me do a detour and create this planet before I proceed to infinity future. Okay. And the reason why he did that, this was God's response to satanic rebellion in heaven. I'm sort of like giving you a summary of my understanding. Satan rebelled in heaven at a certain point in time. God decides, you know what? This fellow is going to cause so much havoc and damage. Let me close that vacancy by creating a certain order of beings that are going to be in my image. I'm going to photocopy myself and put. Then he foresaw that we're going to fall into trouble because of Lucifer. So in order to solve that problem, he made himself the solution to the fall of man. If you notice, we're still discussing prophecy. Okay. Remember, he was slain since the foundation of what? Of the world. Even before he created us, he was already in place as a sacrifice for sin. Okay. So in other words, the cross predates the creation of this planet. And guess what? Because of God's ability to foresee the sin problem in the future, what does he do? He decides, you know what? As I see myself on the cross, let me reverse engineer the sin by 4,000 years, make Adam in my image. Adam will appear exactly how I will appear on the cross, but after 4,000 years of sin. Then create Adam like that, lock myself away within Adam's genes, so that this chap who's going to come and attempt to take over planet Earth does not know that as this person is producing children, I'm going to appear amongst one of these children and I'm going to hit him back. Prophecy. God foreseeing we are going to fall into sin, but knowing that his plans are not going to be thwarted by Satan, he decides, I'm going to be the solution to the problem that Lucifer is going to start. So what does he do? He creates Adam in his own image, knowing that as Adam is reproducing, even if he's going to die, the ones who remain will keep reproducing. Are we together? But finally, when it came to Abraham, who was the chosen line, there was barrenness, which he himself also decided to what? To intervene. Can you imagine somebody barren? Medically, you cannot conceive. Is there no plan? No, it's not possible. Are we together? Next thing you hear, that barren woman is what? Conceived and born a son. Okay. And by the way, all new births within the Christian church are through the same prophetic process. People who are called to this line of living are called prophetically. In other words, if somebody in the congregation today is not here through the process of pure conversion, are we together? That person will not stay with us for long, because the coming problems are going to prove those who are alive in Christ and those who are still what? Dust. Dust will be easily threatened by the crisis that is coming. Okay. In other words, even if after all your efforts at Uvongo, only one genuine soul is won to Christ, that is enough. For Abraham, by the time he died, he had only one son, and that one was enough. Church growth is not counted in terms of numbers. It's counted in terms of prophecy. And prophecy doesn't go according to numbers. It goes according to God's ability. And God's ability is what? How do you say God is all-powerful? Omnipotent. I'd almost forgotten that powerful English word. God's power is omnipotent. And therefore, I thought to myself, let me share with the saints at Uvongo from this perspective. Okay. I think I just one last illustration with Jacob's ladder in contradistinction to the Tower of Babel. If you remember, with the Tower of Babel, it hardly went anywhere, and God still had to come down to see it. But when Jacob, in his feeling like a sinner, but having debased himself to say, no, Lord, you remember, he dreams a ladder coming from heaven, coming down, and it went clear from the third heaven, through the second, down through the first, up to where he slept. And there was a traffic of angels all the way from heaven to here. And that's another prophetic sign to show that prophecy is always from God to people. It's never from people going up to God. Okay. So what the people failed during the Tower of Babel, God achieved through a dream with Jacob sleeping. Okay. And when he woke up, remember what he named that place? You should know. He says, hey, I can see that this area, because of what I've dreamed, I saw the Lord himself, and he called this place the house of God. And he took out an oil canister, maybe that was his oil for lotion, I don't know what he used the oil for. Poured it on that piece of rock, and he made an altar, and he dedicated that place. He says, I'm going to call this place Bethel, house of God. Are we together? So with those thoughts in mind, I think this opens up to the first series. I understand I wasn't there, that you were presenting in Damascene, about how that same line of prophecy has eventually come, and is coming to your question now, to where we stand as the Seventh-day Adventist Church today. Okay. In which sense? In the sense that, according to the book of Revelation, chapter 7, chapter 10, the book that was sweet in the mouth, but was sour in the stomach. You remember? Okay. 1844, October 22. All right. Revelation chapter 11, the two witnesses, who died in the streets of Sodom and Egypt, the French Revolution. Okay, I'm like summarizing the prophetic highlights. Those of, excuse me, of you who are not familiar with what I'm talking about, those are the forthcoming highlights as he keeps planning for future meetings. And then eventually we get to Revelation chapter 12, where we hear about this interesting people. He sees a woman, pure woman, clothed with the sun. Remember, right? Standing on the moon with a crown of 12 stars on her head. Are you together? And she's expectant. All of that is prophetic, and we've discussed it. Remember whom she gave birth? She gave birth to the seed. And the dragon, the prince of darkness, tried to eat up the seed, but he was whisked away back to the heavens. Are you together? But via the tomb, you remember? Okay. And he was so enraged, he wanted to now consume the woman who was now taken away by the spirit of prophecy into the wilderness. And he sent out some water, in other words, the general populace, the democratic dispensations, to go and what? Swallow up the woman, but the wilderness what? Opened. Okay. And now he realized, I'm not getting the woman. He decides to make war against the what? The remnant of his seed, who are identified twofold. What's their identity? They keep the commandments of God, which are also part of the spirit of prophecy. And they what? They have the testimony of Jesus. Revelation 19 verse 10, which is the what? The spirit of prophecy. And now we need to attend to that question. We know for a fact that all those things were timed after 1798, when the papacy's power fell away. We discussed a bit of that last week. Are we together? Only then do we see the rise of the cream of the Protestant Reformation through the Millerite movement. Are we together? And then at the apex of the rise of the Millerite movement was the Great Disappointment. Okay? All right? At the point of the Great Disappointment, okay, you see a lot of people falling away. Remember the history, there were about 50,000 followers who were waiting for the second coming of Christ. After that disappointment, only 50 were left. Who kept checking, where did we go wrong? Because they realized, we have gone wrong. It couldn't be the what? The prophecy. It can't be the prophecy. So they went back and checked. Double checked. And what did they discover? We got the date right, we got the event wrong. Okay, which is why this church exists today. And in December of that same year, God decided to pick the dust called Mrs. White to start revealing himself. And the way he used to do it, they would first sweat with Bible studies. And Ellen White confessed she would be sitting in the Bible study and her mind would be confused. What are they talking about? She couldn't concentrate and she didn't understand what they were studying. For each one of our doctrines, she could not understand what the study was about. Are we together? Then when they were done to say, no, we think this study is confirming this, she would get a vision confirming that they were right. Okay. Where they couldn't reach their mind, but they were exhausted. Okay, God could see, no, they've tried, but they're not getting it. Are we together? He would then give a vision of correction. Remember, doctrine, reproof, correction. Okay? And that's how the basic building blocks of Seventh-day Adventism were built, from the spirit of prophecy, until we had the testimonies backing up the what? The spirit of prophecy, through the ministry of Ellen White. Now here's a question. Today, do we have anybody with a prophetic gift?
If you're a student
Yes.
on the word,
Yes.
you have a prophetic gift.
Okay. Do Did you hear what she just said? I think they want more you.
If you're a student of the Word, if you're led by the Holy Spirit and if you study the Word of God, then you have the spirit of prophecy.
I strongly suspect his question was more along the lines of one of these texts that we read when we were going through the spiritual gifts. Okay. First Corinthians chapter 12.
Verse 10.
Even before we get to the yes. Yeah, verse 10. Yeah, that's verse 10. In verse 29, where he's asking questions. Are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers, to show that each one is their own gift? Okay. But now we're looking at those people who actually hear from God directly, not via this. I think that's what he's asking. So your response is quite right, but then his question extends beyond what you asked to say, do we still have people today who hear from God directly?
The Johns and the Daniels.
What do you think?
I think we receive the light. There's no other light.
Okay. Can I throw in another verse into the mix? The prophet Joel chapter 2. Some of you know where I'm going. Okay. One of the minor prophets, Joel chapter 2. Reading from verse 28. What does he say?
See visions, young men prophesy.
Okay. And when does he say this is going to happen? Okay. During the what? I heard that. During the what? Yes, the latter rain. So we need to understand that there's the latter rain. The word latter implies there's the former. You can't have latter without the former. So we're not going to have another Bible study. When was the former rain?
Pentecost.
At Pentecost. It was at Pentecost. 50 days after Eve. Are we together? Okay? Are we together? That was the former rain, when there was a strong outpouring of the Spirit to a point where there was a wild manifestation of these gifts. But its wildness was orderly. There was no chaos. People could hear the gospel being preached in their respective languages. They even list. We are from this area. We are hearing preaching their language. 3,000 baptized one day, as the Apostle Peter was preaching. Okay. When is the latter rain?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm not going to talk about the latter rain.
Okay.
I just want to check. I understand that during the Pentecost, different people of different languages come together, and then there was a need for the tongues, so that one could hear, they could hear each other. I'm asking the today's tongues. I understand that maybe when you're visiting some churches, you find that people they speak in tongues. Is it? Do you think it's still relevant because we understand each other? You understand each other's tongues.
Maybe just let the Bible respond to that one. Remember when we quickly touched 1 Corinthians chapter 14? Then we'll come back to this issue of the latter rain. 1 Corinthians chapter 14. The Apostle Paul there makes a very powerful point that most people totally ignore. Okay. Starting from verse 22 to verse 25. If you could just read that in one sitting.
Therefore, tongues are a sign, not to them that believe, but to them that believe not. But prophesying serveth not for them that believe not, but for them which believe. If therefore the whole church be come together into one place, and all speak with tongues, and there come in those that are unlearned and unbelievers, will they not say that ye are mad?
Did you hear that question? Could you please ask that question again? If those who are unlearned or are unbelievers come into a church where you are all speaking in tongues, will they not say you are what?
Mad.
Do we know what madness is? That you've lost your mind, you've gone cuckoo, as we would say in the English language. Okay. Would they say that? They find people just going, okay, let's ignore the proper definition of language or tongue. Okay. But that chaos that you find in these churches that say they speak in tongues, isn't that a sign of madness? If you notice, it's here in the Bible. I'm not saying it. Okay. Verse 25.
Yeah, it's for the heathens.
Yeah.
Verse 24. But if all prophesy,
yes,
and there come in one that believeth not,
yeah,
or one unlearned, he is convinced of all. He is judged of all.
yes,
And thus are the secrets of the heart made manifest.
yeah.
And so falling down on his face, he will worship God and reports that God is in you of the truth.
Exactly. Okay. So you heard what the Bible says. Okay. Lastly, the definition of tongue, are we together? If you go to Acts chapter 2, where they clarify the kinds of tongues that they were speaking from the beginning, at the former reign. Okay. They identify them by area, reading from verse 9, preferably starting from verse 8 to verse 11. Acts chapter 2, verse 8 to verse 11.
And how here we have remained in our own tongue, wherein we were born.
Yes. Did you hear that? In our own what? Wherein we were what? It's not tongues that are generated in a church, where they were born. So if those tongues that are spoken in that church are called tongues, we have to ask those people, is this how you speak to each other where you were born? And if they say no, then what kind of tongues are these? Then they start listing the places where they were born.
Hethians,
yes,
and Medes,
yes,
and Alamites,
yes,
and the dwellers in Mesopotamia,
yes,
and in Judea,
yes,
and Cappadocia,
yes,
in Pontus,
yes,
and Asia,
yes, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, Libya, Cyrene, Rome, in other words, what language do they speak in Rome? Latin. So interestingly, one of the first languages that was exhibited in the former reign was Latin. Okay. Both Jews and converts of Judaism, Cretans and Arabs, including Muhammad's language, and this was more than 600 years before Muhammad was born. Somebody was preaching the gospel in Arabic through the power of what? The spirit of prophecy. During the falling of the spirit in the what? The former rain. I hope that answers your question. Okay. So, number two, those people are not speaking in tongues. All right. You call that gibberish. It's not a tongue. Okay. All right. But now I had a question. When is the latter rain?
When the judgment comes and the people of God finishes with.
Okay, when is that? Is it history? Is it now? Is it future? And I see another hand behind you.
I think more in agriculture, that's the last rain before harvest.
Yes, yes.
So basically before the coming of season.
So now, that's the illustration we've been given. So now let us apply it now to the harvest, because this harvest we're talking about is the harvest of Christ harvesting his people from this earth. When is that? Because the former rain we know it was in 80 what?
31.
When was the close of Christ's ministry?
31. 80-31.
80-31, remember? It was 50 days after his resurrection. 80-31 was the time of the former rain. What about the latter rain? To prepare for the harvest. Okay. Yes, sir.
The same chapter.
Yes.
Acts chapter 2.
Acts chapter 2.
Notice from verse 14 to 15 that some of the hearers were accusing these men of being drunk.
Yeah.
And then in verse 16 and 15 and 16, Peter rises up and tells them, but this is that which was spoken by the prophet.
Exactly. To show them this is a fulfillment of what?
Prophecy.
Okay. And by the way, that accusation was an interesting one. They said these people are drunk of liquid fruit, basically liquid fruit grape. They knew these people don't drink alcoholic wine. They said today they've drunk so much liquid fruit, it's made them drunk. Can you imagine being accused of being drunk because of drinking water? Because they know you don't drink what? Alcohol. But today your water has made you what? Drunk. In other words, what you have drunk today must be very strong. Okay. But thanks for highlighting that one. No, in my case, I just wanted to say another prophetic, by the way, which might be coming in the future, God preserving us. Are you together? If you study your prophetic events, according to what we find in Revelation chapter 18, okay, where you find the loud cry coming into the picture, where there's a repetition of present truth, especially the second angel's message. Babylon is fallen. Come out of here, my people. Are we together? At that point in time will be a time coinciding with the close of probation for spiritual Israel, when all in Israel have been counted and numbered, and the 144,000 are known. Okay. So from what I can see personally, it's something that is yet future, but it's not far off. It's not that far off. So I'm just trying to highlight to you that the time of the latter rain is just around the corner. Okay. But we do not have to wait for that event to be filled with the Spirit. We can ask for the Spirit today, and we get the feeling today. Are you following where I'm going with my point? But trying to say, in terms of the prophetic events, that timing of the latter rain will be in proper fulfillment at that point in time. When the mark of the beast becomes official, are we together? And the 144,000 is clear, they are clearly known. And those who are going to die for the sake of the gospel are clearly known. Are we together? As soon as that happens, okay, there'll be an outpouring. We'll see the kind of evangelistic activity we've never seen, where God is saying he's going to take the reins into his own hands. He is going to raise his own pastors, not us generating our pastors. I've seen two hands.
Yes, I was also going to share that James chapter 5. James chapter 5, in coincidence with the last James chapter 5, from verse 7. That you must be patient, waiting for all things. And then verse, the last one, 9 says that the judge is standing after his again. Someone came here in church, and if I remember correctly, it is a study that experienced a financial crisis from James chapter 5, and then the latter rain.
Exactly.
So some of the financial crises that
So we are seeing the signs.
the signs, like he says in the Bible, Jesus
is prophesying. Are you together?
Yes, I was just wanting to confirm.
Yes.
The spirit that is spoken of in Joel.
Yes.
Are you saying that is the former rain?
It's both, actually.
It's both.
Yes.
So it's the latter and the former rain.
Exactly. Because as you keep reading, it will say the spirit is the one who sends both the former and the latter rain.
Okay. Okay, I wanted to just clarify that. Coming back to the issue of the tongues.
Yes.
If I read this correctly, because I think we always take it that the tongues are different dialects. But if you look into this, I don't know whether I'm interpreting it correctly. It says that every man is saying, we are hearing them in our own tongue. So these people are uttering. And the people that are there, everyone who is of different dialect is hearing them in their own tongue. It's not that these people are uttering some language. But when it gets to the people, every one of them from different countries, they are hearing these people as if they are speaking their own language.
Exactly.
So it's not different tongues that these people are speaking. The person that is hearing them in their own language.
Exactly. Exactly. Do you follow where he's going? In other words, I would be here saying I'm speaking in English, but somebody seated here who understands pure Xhosa is hearing pure Xhosa.
Yes. That's the tongue.
Do you follow what I'm saying? Okay. Which also doesn't efface the ability for somebody to actually do what we're talking about. Like, for example, I remember hearing this story when I was a small boy. I used to enjoy mission reports. I've just forgotten the name of this thing because I always used to know it. There was a certain missionary. He once served in Zimbabwe for some time, and then he was sent as a missionary to China. The first time China started opening up for Christian activity, sometime in the 80s, 70s, 80s. Okay. This man, whom I had also seen personally presenting at Solusi, he was sent there. He knew not Chinese, but he realized there is a vacancy, there is a need. And when they called on him, he says, no, I'm going to go. When he got to China, as he was praying, Lord, use me. I do not know what I'm supposed to do here. Are we together? Okay. When he went out onto the street, opened his mouth, suddenly pure Chinese came out of his mouth. And he started speaking Chinese from nowhere. But if you notice, it was in line with what? Not so that he could enter the Chinese stock market. To do with prophecy. Okay, and he's not the only one I've heard about. But him, because I knew him personally, I never forgot that story. That is also implying There are some of us who have got a knack with languages. When we go to certain places, we easily absorb languages and we can start conversing with the locals in their language. Okay? I strongly suspect that I've got that kind of a skill, because if you put me in a community for like 2 weeks, a month, I start speaking whatever they speak. That's how I learned my Xhosa. I ended up at Bethel, having not stayed much with Xhosa people. Within a question of a month or so, you couldn't tell unless you asked me, who are you? And I tell you, oh, but you sound like a local. And I say, yeah. Are we together? Prior to getting to Bethel, I had stayed in Mabato with Pastor Mbetsi. Those of you who know Pastor Mbetsi for some time. They speak Setswana there predominantly. Okay. After about a month or so, my Setswana came in, which is why I don't struggle with Sesotho. Are we together? So some of us have those kinds of gifts. And when we start using them for the purpose of the gospel, that's a gift of tongues, because that's not your mother tongue. Are we together? And you are also using it to God's glory, to spread the what? Prophecy. Interesting engagement. Yes, yes.
I just want to show
Okay.
the tongues. They are speaking, they are just speaking. That's the communication of spirit.
Exactly.
They are speaking like I'm speaking.
Exactly.
But somebody else hears.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And then the example comes to me reading about this.
Yes, this mission.
This missionary who just spoke Chinese. Was speaking Chinese, or maybe was speaking his own language, and then the Chinese could hear.
No, apparently he discovered when they speak, he understands, and he responds in Chinese.
And after finishing, he still understands.
Yes, he maintained that knowledge of Chinese until he died. It was just plain supernatural. What I never confirmed was writing. Yes. But speech and comprehension. Yeah. Like it was like just like at a moment, but after like a prayer season, because he was sent, got there with his family, and he's wondering, okay, this is my thing, I'm a missionary. Now I'm in China. People here don't speak English. Okay. Although now, as we know, everybody in China wants to learn how to speak English. Okay. Makes sense, right?